Hello and welcome. My name is Billy, and in this video, I'm going to be doing the Reluctant TBR tag. I actually was inspired to do this after watching another YouTuber's video. And I can't remember her name, but I'll put the video on the screen and I'll link it in the description. But from what I understand about this tag is these are basically books that you have been wanting to read, but for whatever various reason you haven't. And there are like, I think it's like 12 different questions, and it's a book you haven't read for X reason. And so I just thought it was really fun and I thought I would try it. I think you're supposed to only pick one book, but I couldn't just pick one for some of them. So I do have maybe two for some or several for some of them. So without further ado, I'll just hop right in. So the first question is a book you want to read that was a softie enough, but you want to try again. And for this one, I have two books. The first is Sula, and the second is Just Above My Head by James Baldwin. So Sula is by Toni Morrison, and I got about 14 pages in. And the thing about Toni Morrison is I feel like you really have to pay attention when you're reading her books or else you'll miss something. And so me not finishing this was less about the book itself and more about just not being able to concentrate. And at that time, and then for James Baldwin, Just Above My Head, I think I just wasn't ready to read this. For this one, I made it like 41 pages in. And I remember reading about, so this is a story of grief. A man is grieving the death of his brother. And it's kind of like going back into their life and everything. And there was just a scene where the brother had like his first like homosexual encounter, and it wasn't necessarily like consensual, and it was just a lot. And then there's like the way this is written, there are, well, as far as I had gotten, there were parts where it's kind of like he's telling the story, but then you realize it's like in the person's brain and he's just like daydreaming. And so it's just one of those where you like, again, you got to focus, you got to pay attention or you'll miss something. So but I definitely do want to get back to this, and it's a James Baldwin book I haven't heard many people talk about. And so yeah, I do want to get to this. These were softy enoughs. The next question is books you want to read, but you read another book by the author and did not enjoy it. So for this one, so the book I read and did not like it, that was Message in a Bottle by Nicholas Sparks. This was like the second Nicholas Sparks book I read, but after I read this, I was like, this is really not good. And I already like, so basically, Nicholas Sparks for me is like an author I like to read when I don't want to think too much. But you go in and you have to realize that like it's going to be very unrealistic and people are going to be falling in love very quickly. And so I do go in knowing that. But this was just too much. This was too much. But with saying that, I still do want to read him. And I have read Nights in Rodanthe by him, and I did like this book. And I also have The Lucky One, and I also have A Walk to Remember, but it's not near me and I don't feel like getting it. But so I do want to read more from him, but Message in a Bottle was just not it. It was not it. It wasn't. The next question is a book you want to read, but it's brand new and you don't know when you'll get around to it. So for that, I have 50 Words for Rain by Asha Lemme. This is, I don't think it's necessarily a new book. It was published in 2020, but it's one of the newest ones I've acquired. And this book is about, I don't know much about it, but this book is about a child who's like mixed race. I believe the child is like Japanese and something else. And the child, for whatever reason, is like dropped off at her Japanese grandparents' home. and they are kind of ashamed to have like a biracial grandchild. And so they put, I think it's a her, they put her in the like the attic, and they hide her away from people. And so it's just about her life, like growing up under in this house under these conditions. And so it seemed very, very fascinating. It reminded me of The Little Princess. Is that what it's called? It made me think of The Little Princess, even though that's completely different. But just the fact of her like being put in the attic made me think of that. But I do want to get to this. I just don't know when I will. The next question is a book you want to read, but the cover is painfully ugly. So I really didn't have one for this one. So this is kind of a cheat, but I chose I'm Eve, which is a book, probably one of the only books I have that doesn't, I don't have the dust jacket for this. So there is no cover. So I'm saying that's an ugly cover. Um, but this is about a woman with multiple personalities, and it's written by the woman with multiple personalities. And I actually got to page 154 in this, and for whatever reason, I just put it down, but I do want to get back to it. A book you want to read, but it's a classic that might be good for you, but you're not that interested. And for this, I have three. I have The Art of War, Meditations, and The Republic. And if you can figure it out, the theme of these are like philosophy, like thoughts, musings. I these are books where once I read them, I feel like I'll like have like I think they're just gonna be like quotable books and like being like light enlightened, if you will. But they're not like your typical formats. So many of them are just kind of like musings. And this one I made it to like page 33. And even this, it's just kind of like random thoughts. And so I think it's because these aren't books that have like a plot that you're necessarily following throughout. They're organized, but they're not like something that has a general flow. I feel like these are books you don't read cover to cover all at once. You just pick them up, you read a little bit, you put them down. That is probably why I haven't gotten to them, because I like to complete books and I'm not very good. Even though some of these I have started, like I'm not really good at like reading multiple books at once or like several books at once, because I think like, oh, I could have read like I read 20 pages in this book. I could have read 20 pages in this other book, and then I'd be that much closer to finishing it. The next question, I need some water. Okay. The next question is a book you want to read, but it's humongous and intimidating. And for this, I also have three books. And those are The Count of Monte Cristo, The Brothers Karamazov, and Anna Karenina. So I actually started Anna Karenina. I forget how far I got, but I think I'm going to enjoy all of these books because I really do like classics, and all of these are classics. I do know the general story of the Count of Monte Cristo, and I have heard enough about the Karamazov. I don't know that much about Anna Karenina, and I kind of wanted to go into this blind, but they're huge. Like, look at them. But these type of books I like to do like physical and audio, and I'm not a huge audio reader. I'm probably in the minority of people who think that audiobooks are not really reading, or at least that's what my brain tells myself. And so I can't just listen to these. I think that would be like the easiest thing to do. But what I do like to do is kind of listen and read at the same time, and that kind of keeps the pace. And especially I was listening to this on audio and reading it, and it really helps with like pronouncing the names because this is like Russian literature. Yeah, these are some big ones I want to get to at some point. Next question. A book you want to read because it is hyped but you aren't excited. For this, I wouldn't say I'm not excited because I don't buy books I'm not excited to read, but for that I picked A Little Life. And I'm not saying I'm not excited to read this, but I don't feel like I'm gonna have like the reaction others have had with this book. Like, I don't think I'm gonna be bawling my eyes out. Who knows? We'll see. I had started this at one point and I didn't realize this is a more like character driven book. And so I was like, nothing is really happening. But I do like those type of books. It's just I wasn't aware of that going in. I think this will be good. I just don't think I'm gonna have like that, like, oh my gosh, this is like the best book reaction that so many people have had. This is also a chunker. Book you want to read, but you need to be in the right headspace to enjoy it. So for that, I have The Color Purple by Alice Walker. I have seen this movie. I know the general story, but I had started this. One thing I didn't realize about The Color Purple is this book is basically a series of letters. For me, I got to be in the right headspace because it starts off with trauma. And the fact that you have Nettie, who is a Black girl, and basically her whole life is like told and treated like she's not beautiful. And she just, it's like accepted that this is just the way I'm treated. She just like accepts it, and I'm sure that will change as the book goes on. It's just so heartbreaking. It's just so heartbreaking for her to just accept that this is just how my life is and how I'm treated. And she, from the few letters that I read, like she never complains about any way that she's treated. It's just like matter of fact that this is just what is. Girl, you deserve better. But it was a different time. And the other book I have on that's kind of in the same vein is Roots by Alex Haley. I love autobiography of Malcolm X, written by Alex Haley. And I want to read something else from him, but I know this is like a slavery story, so I know it's going to be heavy. And I just feel like, you got to get your mind right for a book like this. A book you want to read, but you're on the fence about considering the series. So for this, I have China Rich Girlfriend. This is actually the second book in this series. I went to a book swap, and you know how at the end of the book swap, there's not really that many books left. And so, it's just like slim pickings. And that's kind of how I came to get this. I saw the first book at my library. I don't know if it's my kind of book, but if you've read the first book, which is Crazy Rich Asians, let me know what you thought about it. I'm not a huge series person, so I'm not sure if I even want to start this, if I'm going to like it. Do I really want to have to commit myself to finishing? Because the completist in me will want to read all of the books in the series. The next question is a book you want to read, but has been on your TBR for a really long time. So for this one, I have Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. I don't know when I bought this, but it literally has moved with me several times and I have never read it. I believe this is a thriller. I think a man's wife goes missing or something, but I think many people have read this. Many people probably have watched this movie. I've done neither, and I think it's gonna be good. I just don't know why I just don't gravitate to picking it up. The next question is a book you want to read, but it's in a genre outside your comfort zone. So for this one, I actually have the Southern Reach trilogy. Technically, I have read the first book, Annihilation, in this. This is science fiction, and I really enjoyed the first book. It's like this expedition is going off into this like area X where like these weird things are happening and the government has blocked off the area and they're trying to figure out what's going on. And it was just so like fast paced. Like something was weird was happening like all the time. Like two people disappear like the first the first day on the expedition. So it's very fast paced. But then I started the second book, which is Authority, and it's much slower. And it's not that it's not good. I think it's just like building the scene for like the really good stuff to happen. But it was just such a jarring difference from the first book. And so that, coupled with the fact that it is science fiction and like things are happening and they're not completely making sense and you're not really getting answers, you kind of just have to keep going. But it's not really a genre I read that much. This is a book I do want to come back to. The next question is a book you want to read, but despite owning it, you'll probably never read it. So I thought this was a funny question. Hold on. I have three for this one as well. I have read aspects of these books, um, but I have several books on World War one being the First World War, Paris 19, and Ring of Steel. Honestly, I've read like certain like excerpts from this, chapters from these books. I don't feel like they're the type of books you just read cover to cover. With saying that, I don't know if I would ever read one of these completely. I feel like I'll just read it when I have an interest or like want to learn about a specific thing. Three more questions. A book you want to read, but it's only out of obligation to a book club or friend's recommendation. So I am not really in any book clubs and I don't really feel like I have obligations, but I was gifted some books from a friend of mine and I read one of them and I was kind of underwhelmed. And so it makes me hesitant to read the other ones that I was gifted because I'm like, will I be underwhelmed like I was with this one? So the book I read was The Jane Austen Remedy. And this is supposed to be a memoir about this woman who, like, in her 70s, just like starts a new life. And it's supposed to be how Jane Austen, like, inspires her to do this. And she uses Jane Austen books to find herself and reinvent herself. But it's more of a study on Jane Austen's books, and it doesn't give enough about her. I felt bamboozled because it's a memoir, but I feel like I just learned more about Jane Austen books. If you like Jane Austen books, I think you'll like this book if you love reading about them. I felt kind of bamboozled by this, and so the other two books that I want to read because I want to be able to talk to my friend about them and say that I have read them and talked to her because she really likes these books were one was Justice by Dominique Dune. This is true crime. It's from this guy. His daughter was murdered, and so he writes about his experience dealing with her murder, being in the press, the trial, all of that. But then he, as a journalist, he talks about his coverage of some different influential cases. I know he has one like on O.J. Simpson, some other ones he does. Death by fire of multi-billionaire banker Edmund Safra, Martha Moxley, different just notable like cases over time. And so he is writing about those cases. I do find this interesting, and I did read the first like few pages, especially his experience with the first chapter is about his daughter's murder. And it was really interesting, but for some reason I put this down. I'm scared to read it, but I want to read it. And then the next one I have is The Women by Kristen Hanna. I know this is historical fiction. It's looking at women's role in the Vietnam War, I believe. This is not an author I've read before. It's not a book I would typically pick up for myself. And so it may or may not be good. I don't know. But we'll see when and if I ever get to it. A book you want to read, but the negative reviews have made you less excited. For that, I have this beautiful copy of David Copperfield. I recently saw a booktuber talking about this book, and they were saying how they just had to put it down because it was kind of wordy. And I read the first few like paragraphs and I could see that, but I want to give it a chance. It's also a very long book. This is one I would have to do like audio and the book. But the reason I wanted to read this is because I picked up Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. And I know you don't, this is kind of a play off of David Copperfield. I don't know if it's necessarily a retelling, like a modern retelling necessarily, but it's heavily influenced by this. And I've read that you don't have to read the original before reading this, but if you do, you get like a greater appreciation for what Barbara Kingsolver does. That's why I wanted to read this first and then read this. And the last question is a book you want to read, but it hasn't come out yet. This isn't really like a reluctant TBR read. I chose The Granddaughter by Bernard Schlenk. He's the author of this book, The Reader, which I really, really enjoyed. I believe The Granddaughter comes out in January of 2025. And I'm not sure if it's a new book or if it's just newly translated from German into English. It has a similar theme in the reader in that it's looking at the different generations since World War II, and you're seeing how younger and older generations, their ideologies and just their differences during that time. It's about German reunification, and you have this older man who his wife is from East Germany, and she ends up dying, and he finds out these secrets about her, and he goes back to East Germany to get answers. And through this, I think he's going to discover like a daughter that she had before she met him. When he meets this daughter, she kind of accepts him as a grandfather. And so I think that's why it's called The Granddaughter. This granddaughter is living in a neo-Nazi community in the country. And so I think it's going to be where he's going to try to make her see that this isn't what you need to be doing. And I lived through the war and I know what that is. And this is not it. And that's in the same vein as the reader, because in the reader, you have older generations who were around during the war and younger generations who feel like, how could you let this happen? And people need to pay for like their actions and consequences for allowing that to happen. Again, you have these different ideologies. This was a very good book, by the way. I would highly recommend it. That's my video. I hope you enjoyed it. These are books that I want to read, but for whatever reason have not gotten to. But I'm going to try to sprinkle them in over the next few months. Obviously, I'm not going to read all of these this year. I appreciate you watching, and leave a comment if you've read any of these books, if I need to like jump on it quicker, sooner rather than later. And yeah, I'll see you in my next video. Bye.